There is a beautiful documentary on Netflix called Ram Dass Going Home. Ram Dass is a really famous spiritual teacher. You've probably heard of him. If you have not checked out this documentary on Netflix, man, you gotta check it out. It's just beautiful. One of the scenes in the movie, though, or in the documentary, it's Ram Dass talking about death, and he says, when you are identified with your soul, death is just a snap. And when I first watched this documentary, this was way back, right as I was getting into meditation, learning about this whole field of spirituality. I was very new on the path, so to speak. I had no idea what this dude was referring to. I was like, what? What do you mean if I'm identified with my soul? That didn't make sense. The idea that death was something that I could just snap through, that absolutely made no sense either. And the energy with which he delivered that message, just the grace that was exuding out of his being as he was describing this, it had an authenticity to it. It didn't feel like someone just throwing around philosophy as a theory. It had this authentic integrity and experiential, it felt like he was living from experience as he was speaking those words. And it's just, it's something that has been difficult to try to understand as I've reflected on it, all these years. And even just the topic of death in general, reflecting on the topic of death has been difficult to wrap my head around. The thing about death and spirituality is that it's something that you cannot avoid. On this path, when you are deconstructing the world, when you are deconstructing the self, when you are trying to understand these very deep existential questions like what is reality, what is suffering, what is happiness, inevitably you will run into the question, what is death? You just are going to run into that question. And this is even more pertinent if you are practicing meditation very deeply, which is, again, something that I would highly recommend. I talk about it a lot on my channel. So I assume that you're practicing meditation daily, that you've got a pretty serious practice relative to the general population. And one of these things that meditation facilitates is this opening up of the subconscious mind into conscious awareness. So thoughts and feelings and emotions that we typically don't have much clarity on start to surface and bubble and percolate into conscious awareness because of this deep meditation practice that we are doing. It's like we become transparent to the inner workings of our own mind, things that are happening always under the radar, but we just don't typically have the sensitivity to experience them clearly. And one of these subtle emotions that we come to find constantly operating underneath, like I said, the surface level of awareness is the fear of death. Almost all of our action in some way, shape, or form is filtered through this one existential assumption that death is a no-no, that death is bad. And I'm not saying that death is not bad. I think that the fear of death is here for a reason. If we didn't have the fear of death, we wouldn't survive. But I think what goes unnoticed for 99.9% of the population, and including a large percentage of the population that's interested in spirituality, is that we don't notice that this fear is with us constantly. It is just constantly watching and informing our decisions, our behaviors, our emotions. This is the foundation of the sense of self, this fear of death, this fear of annihilation. So as we're deconstructing our beliefs about reality and the self and the world and other people and what we think is true, what we think is false, these types of deep practices and contemplative questions and whatnot, you run into death. You run into death. And let me just take a moment to point out, yes, I understand it's very ironic that I am even speaking as though I have something to say about death, given that I am a young person who is not going through death. I get the irony. But I would challenge that idea that we can't learn something about death, that we can't investigate our fear of death, that we can't contemplate this question, what is death? What is death? In Theravada Buddhism, there is actually, it's actually recommended that we sit and contemplate the fact of our own mortality, the fact that we are going to die, that that's a meditation technique. To just sit and be with the reality that things are impermanent, that we are going to one day die. And that this helps lead towards liberation and enlightenment. So I would challenge the notion that we can't become conscious of some facet of death before we die. One of the things that we stumble into as we are considering death, when we're being with death, when we are coming into contact with our fear of death, when we can notice as we are driving down the street that, oh, like I'm not just gonna swerve off the road because I'm actually terrified of dying. Like that's why I'm focused, I'm aware, I'm paying attention, even when we're goofing off trying to get the perfect Spotify song and, you know, maybe texting when we're not supposed to. Even throughout all of that, underneath all of that, there is this fear of death that's making sure that we don't go too off the rails, that we don't get too distracted. There's always that like background awareness keeping us alive. And that background awareness keeping us alive is fueled by this emotional attachment to being alive. And as we investigate that, as we are with that, we can learn things about death. We really can. If we just consider what the present moment is, like what is this present moment that we have right now? What is this moment, this actuality of being, this actuality of our present moment direct experience? It seems reasonable to say that it's just a succession of moments. It's just moment A, moment B, moment C, and I guess that should be reversed since I'm making this video. Moment 1, moment 2, moment 3. The camera is like, never mind. So it's just a succession of moments. And something that's really fascinating that we can start to kind of like clue our minds onto is, well, moment 1 happens and then moment 2 happens, but where does moment 1 go when moment 2 arises? And where does moment 2 go when moment 3 arises? Like, what's going on here? Like, clearly there is a present moment, there is a presence in this present moment. There is experience and reality, but where does reality go when it's done being moment 1 and becoming moment 2? And the more mindfully that we can pay attention to our direct experience, we start to actually experience that the present moment has this birth and death process going on constantly. That moments are simultaneously arising and collapsing to give way for new moments to arise and pass, and that this cycle of arising and passing is happening constantly at speeds that our minds are not trained to pick up on. There is this expansive and contractive nature to the impermanent dance of form, to kind of speak it poetically. And when we start to experience this impermanence, this anicca, as it's called in Buddhism, when we actually can sensitize our attention onto this expansive and contractive quality of our direct experience and our perceptive field, direct experience meaning our perceptive field, we can pick up, or rather we can tune into one of two flavors of this process. We can either tune into the expansive quality of it, or we can tune into the contractive quality of it. In other words, we can tune into the birthing process or the dying process. So as a moment is contracting, we can start to feel this contractive flavor of the present moment. We can start to pay attention to our direct experience and feel this contraction of moments constantly, moment after moment after moment. Moment one contracts, and then we feel moment two contract, and then we feel moment three contract, and this is all happening at lightning speeds. There's no way to conceptualize about it because the concepts, they need time to exist, and we're paying so close to our direct experience that even time starts to evaporate. And we can gain insight into the fact that, like, oh, this is what death is. Death is a contractive quality of the present moment, meaning that when we physically die, it's just one more transformation. It's just one more birth and death, arising and passing, expansion and contraction flavor of the present moment. And the idea that death is the end, I mean, that would go against what we've experienced for our entire lives. That would go against every other death that we've experienced, because make no mistake about it, we are going through death right now. Like, this moment is dying and being reborn moment after moment after moment. And we can pay attention to our present moment experience and see that. Now, why is this significant? Well, because it helps us deal with our fear of death. We see that, like, wait a second, man, like I've literally been doing this my whole life. And even though the degree of transformation and change is probably much more massive after physical death, the significance of that change is only important relative to being a human self. But if we are not indeed a human self, if we are a soul, as Ram Dass said, and if we recognize ourselves as soul, as emptiness, then the degree or nature of the transformation after a birth and death process within this moment means very, very, very little. It is just as empty as we are. And therefore it's just another beautiful facet of existence. There's nothing to worry about or fear. Now, I say all that and I have to just say humbly, I'm still terrified of dying. Make no mistake about it. But I must be honest and also say that I feel like gained momentum into not being as freaked out about death. I've at least gained traction and momentum about how to handle it, how to process the fact that I will die, because I've at least somewhat recognized that there is no one to die, and that I am constantly dying and being reborn every single moment. And I've experienced this within deep meditative absorption and practice. And so I would just say, well, there's some motivation for deep meditation practice. Just cultivating so much mindfulness that you see the entire moment by moment Big Bang of reality. new constant Big Bangs happening and creating life and existence, the very fabric of life and death. So that's all I really had to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you like this style of content, please hit that subscribe button. I think that is the smoothest I have ever communicated all that YouTube salesmanship, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until next time.